Well, welcome everybody to the Visions 2020 here in Minneapolis. And yes, I am actually here in Minneapolis, where we were hoping to have this year's Vision Conference at. I wish you could have been here, but obviously with COVID and we've had a lot of stress in our city the last few weeks. Fortunately, we're doing a lot better now. We're starting to heal. But I would have liked to have greeted you all in person. So this will be the next best thing. So my name is Paul Karos. And I am going to just tell you a little bit about my life story. And hopefully in the process of doing that, it can help you in whatever part of your journey you're in as it relates to retinal disease. So, when I was 8 years old, my parents started to notice that there were things I was unable to see. For example, I'd come home early from playing night games because our friends would want to stay out, and I'd just come home and say, I just can't see. I don't get how they're staying out there. Or we'd be going out to get ice cream as a family, and it was dusk, and we'd go out to get into the car, and I didn't notice that the passenger car door was open. And my dad actually saw me walk right into the car door. I just didn't see it. It was getting dark. And so we went down to the University of Minnesota, which had a very good retinal effort, and they did all kinds of tests, some which were quite invasive, of course. And they came down out to the room, and I'll never forget because they then sat me and my mom and my dad down to tell us that we have this devastating disease called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. And we didn't really know what hit us, actually, to be honest. But they proceeded to tell us the main things that will be happening, that will have night blindness, which I was already experiencing by age 8, and that eventually it would my tunnel vision would lead to total blindness. And that tunnel vision is really like kind of having binoculars on your eyes and slowly kind of closing those binoculars until they get closed off to nothing. And so this was devastating for us. And it was a very scary thing to have this diagnosis. And now for about the last 10 to 15 years, I really am about 99% blind, which means I really can't see faces anymore, or colors, or people, or steps, or pretty much anything. But I will say, I can still see a little light. So if there's bright light, I can see light. And a little light actually makes a big difference, just a little bit of light. So this diagnosis at age 8, we didn't really know what was going to hit us. And it really began a period of very intense suffering for me, both emotionally, physically, spiritually. It really was very difficult because I did lose a great deal of sight right away. And the doctors really didn't know as much about RP back in those days. And they thought I'd be totally blind by the time I was 15. That didn't turn out to be true, thank God, but I did lose a lot of sight. And, it brought up a lot of issues for me. Socially, I really felt kind of awkward many times, whether it was in gym class, I'd be playing baseball outside and a ball would be coming at me, and I'd see it for a second and maybe it'd roll right by me. I just didn't see it. And kids would say, what's wrong with you? Can't you see? So it really was like a peer teasing, bullying type experience I had many times. And, looking back, I don't think they actually meant to be mean, but I was too afraid to be honest. I was too afraid to tell the truth about I did have an eye disease because I was too ashamed. Or in classes, I really felt myself falling behind academically. I just couldn't keep up. And again, I was too afraid to ask for help. And so after a while, when you have this over and over, you start to believe deep inside that maybe I'm stupid, or maybe I'm just weird. Okay. Both of which didn't turn out to be true. And that's not true for anybody, by the way. But it really did bring some real emotional and physical and spiritual suffering. In fact, I can remember crying myself to sleep in those elementary years and in my middle school years, just crying out like, why me? Why me, God? My brothers don't have this. My sister doesn't have this. My friends don't have this. Why me? It was very, very difficult. And, so by the time I did get to driving age, I was already legally blind. So I was never able to drive or, to ask girls out. Things of this nature were very stressful. for me. And so as I went into high school, I really had some very legitimate fears that were inside of me. For example, how am I ever going to go to college? How am I going to go to college? Especially back in those days in the 70s, we didn't have the technology we have now. We didn't have scanning technology and things of that nature. So how am I going to actually go to college? Or what company is ever going to hire a blind guy? I mean, why would a company hire a blind guy? Or, maybe even more important, what woman would ever marry me? How am I going to be a husband? How am I going to be a dad? These were really legitimate fears, and it caused a lot of anxiety in my life. It really did. So I really want to tell all of you that if you've just gotten diagnosed, or if you've had a retinal disease for quite some time, or if you're a family member of somebody who has retinal disease, it's going to be okay. In fact, you can kind of take a big deep breath. We're not alone. Do you know there's over 10 million people in the United States that have retinal disease? And obviously around the world, many, many, many more. And this is why the work that the Foundation Fighting Blindness does is just so important. It is to do research to find a cure for this disease. When we look around the world today, there are so many technological developments going on, whether it's in the IT world with artificial intelligence or videography, or some of the incredible technologies with social media, whether it's robotics, whether it's genetics. And really, the foundation wants to make curing retinal disease a generational success story. That's the goal. That's why we raise money for the Foundation Fighting Blindness, because its mission of getting money directly into research to find a cure is so impactful. And so we are not alone. There's lots of us struggling in this. And as I'll get into, there's even blessings that can come from all of this. So we're not alone. So I thought it'd be good to tell you a little bit about what, as I look back, really impacted my life to be able to move through these difficulties that I was having. And I would say there were two things. The first were people. People. We need each other. And I want to highlight just a few. The first one is Gordon Gund, our beloved Gordon Gund, who started and founded the Foundation Fighting Blindness. When I was a teenager, he had purchased the Minnesota North Star professional hockey team here in Minnesota. And some of my neighbors were Minnesota North Star players. And what ended up happening is that because of these neighbors, a man by the name of Lou Nanny, who's a very well-known hockey personality in the country, he introduced me to Gordon Gund. And I will never forget meeting him and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if this man, who is really at that point, he was very, very blind or very advanced in his disease, if he can do all these things, maybe I can do some of these things. Maybe those fears I'm having about, can I even hold a job, really won't be fears worthy of being afraid of. Had a huge impact in my life. And the second one was really my Sunday school teacher and youth workers that over and over would tell me that, somehow when we have struggles, good can come, even though it doesn't look like it at the time. Somehow good can come from struggles, and that God loves everybody, and everybody's created with opportunities to grow. And then there were a few friends of mine, Rick and Jeff Smith, my neighborhood friends. Doesn't take a lot of friends. One or two can literally make the difference. And they were there for me while I was losing my sight, helping me at night, guiding me, kind of sometimes secretively because I was too ashamed sometimes. So people was the first. And the second thing for me, I would say, was my faith. That, my faith tradition is Greek Orthodox Christian. But whatever your faith tradition is, faith can have a very powerful impact to know that there's something bigger out there watching over, helping, guiding, assisting. And I was introduced to a great verse in the scriptures that really is a human truth. In fact, every world religion tries to deal with this idea of struggle or suffering. because suffering is an experience we all have, all over the world, suffering. And don't we see that today in our country? Lots of suffering going on. So whether it's the Buddhist tradition or the Jewish tradition or the Muslim tradition or the Hindu tradition or the Christian tradition, we all take a shot at looking at suffering. So this verse in Romans I use even when I speak to public schools, because it's just such a human truth. And it goes like this: we rejoice in our suffering, which is tough to do. We rejoice in our suffering, for suffering brings endurance. Endurance brings character, and character brings hope. And hope does not disappoint. So we rejoice in our suffering. That's really hard, but that suffering somehow we trust is going to bring something good eventually. For suffering brings endurance. In other words, we can't become people of resiliency or endurance without a little hardship. You know, like in the workout world, what do they call it? No pain, no gain. Got to have a little pain sometimes, but then we become people of endurance. And as we become people of endurance, then we can become people of character, people full of the human virtues of kindness and gentleness and compassion and wisdom and courage. And as we become people of character, we find ourselves becoming people of hope. Hope is like something good's going to happen, or glass half full. And when we become people of hope, hope does not disappoint. And so this is a human truth, that if we allow our retinal disease to in some ways do its work in synergy, then, you know, somehow we move through these things. And that brings me to another very important topic, and that is the grief of losing our eyes. It is difficult, you know, and in fact, it's a form of a death, because our eyes kind of die over time, depending on which retinal disease that we have. In my case, that is the progression without a cure that it goes to. And so the social workers and the counselors in the world for years have had these 5 steps of grief. And I think they're really important to look at. The first one is denial. Denial. And I can remember this. I'm not going to go blind. I don't care. I can still see. I can still ride my bike. This was at 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. I'm not going to go blind. Denial. Okay, it's okay to have denial, but we don't stay in denial. We keep moving. And you know, I think here, parents, it's really important. Allow and encourage your kids to experience their grief. It is really important that we don't try to rush through the healing of suffering. And I would even say for parents, make sure you go through your grief, because you've got grief too. You didn't expect to have a child with retinal disease. And I look at my mom and dad, and they both handle it differently. My mom, she kind of went through those stages, and she was like a rock for me. My dad had a much harder time, although he eventually, as I got into my 20s and 30s, he really did do the full circle, and it was a beautiful man. I loved my dad. But when I was younger, he had a hard time, and he ignored the grief. So I would say, make sure you go through. So denial, what's the second step? Anger. We're going to get angry, like me. Why me? This stinks. It is not easy. This is very difficult, and we're going to have some anger. But you see, we don't stay in the anger. We keep moving. And that leads us to step 3, which is bargaining. Sometimes we'll find ourselves bargaining. Well, if I do this, maybe this will happen. Or if I do this right, maybe this will happen. Or if I do this, then maybe, God, you'll do this. It's okay, we're going to bargain. But don't stay in the bargaining. And then we hit the 4th one, which is kind of hard this far into grief, and that's sadness. Sadness that may even lead to depression. It's going to be sad. It's a loss to lose our sight. It's a loss not to be able to see my kids anymore, or to see my wife's face, or to see nature the way I used to be able to see it. This is sad. But we have to feel that sadness, not ignore it, not bury it where it can become infected wounds. But we don't stay in the sadness. We keep moving. And that leads us to acceptance. Acceptance. Acceptance that as it comes to my eye disease, I can't do anything today about it. I accept where I'm at. I accept what's happening. But we don't just accept to lay down and be still. We accept to keep moving. We accept maybe to go raise money for the foundation to find a cure. We accept to have courage to move forward in using our talents and our gifts in some type of a profession to provide for my needs and the needs of my future family, perhaps. We keep accepting to have an impact to those around us. See? So it's really important that we don't try to go from step A, denial, and jump to step E. Be patient. Let things happen. Feel the pain. Bring the wounds out so they can be healed, not to keep them buried and deny them. And then things can happen. And then we can actually see some of that endurance, character, and hope take place. So let me finish what happened to the rest of my life story. I did go on to college. I was able to graduate. It was an amazing thing. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, we did not have the technology we have today, but I was able to get through college by 300 volunteers in the state of Minnesota that took 3 hours a week to read for the visually impaired. And I had people that would come read my tests at college. I could not have graduated college without the assistance of others. I am so grateful for their sacrifice to help other people. So I did go on to college. I did get hired by a company. And you know, my first job was just taking a huge stack of papers and having my big magnifying glasses and taking these papers and entering them into a computer. This was back in 1980 when PCs were very new at that time. It was a boring job, but I will tell you, and this is very important for you young people, whatever job you start in, even if you hate it, just do great work. I call it for young people 100% referenceability, that whatever we have given to us, that we start somewhere and we just do a great job. And as we do a great job there, doors open up, things start to happen. And that's what happened for me. I was given more and more responsibility. So by the time I graduated in 1984, they made me what was called an airline analyst, which means my job in a brokerage firm of Piper Jaffray, that was the name of the company. Piper Jaffray was a small investment bank at that time. It's a much bigger investment bank now. It's a national big player. But at that time, it was a much smaller player. My job was to be an airline analyst. So that means know everything about airlines. Go talk with airline management teams, study the industry, financially model the industry, write research reports, make recommendations. Should you buy Delta or sell United or buy American Airlines, whatever it might be, and why, who's going to win, who's going to lose. And then I got recruited to New York in my mid-20s. I would have never expected that I would leave Minnesota. And it was scary to go there as a visually impaired guy, losing my sight, because by the time I got even to college, I couldn't read anymore without huge magnification. But I did it. And I worked and I worked and I worked. And within a short period of time, within about 5 years, I became, at the age of 29, the youngest partner named at Credit Suisse First Boston at that time. That's the third largest investment bank in New York City. And then I became what's called the #1 ranked airline analyst for 5 straight years. It was incredible. So from a worldly perspective, despite the visual impairment, I was able to achieve more than I could have ever imagined I would achieve. First class travel all over the world, 5-star hotels, 5-star restaurants. I was on every major TV show being interviewed for my knowledge of the airline industry, whether it was CNN or CNBC or Good Morning America or the Today Show. I'd be picked up in a limo, brought to the green room at Rockefeller Center, have makeup put on my face for this face of mine, okay? It was quite incredible. But it's interesting. Like any other human being, balance is important. And I got to a point where I kind of lost that balance for quite a number of years. And it sort of all came to a head in 1995 when I was in a hotel room in Europe It was in Amsterdam, called Hotel de Europe, a beautiful hotel. And I had been in 27 cities in 29 days doing business. And the last 7 of those cities were in Europe. And I'll never forget, after a great day of business, I was going to bed. I was laying my head back in this beautiful poster bed, you know, with the canopy up above and the down comforters and pillows. And I laid my head back and I laid my head back and I just, out of the blue, began to weep and weep. I cried for over 2 hours. Sorry about that. I cried for about 2 hours, uncontrollably. I didn't even know what hit me. It's like my body and my soul completely gave out on me. And everything started to make sense to me. All I had at that point was my work. I ignored my marriage. I ignored my family, my friends. My health was terrible. And that was the beginning for me to realize that I need to start having a whole life. I was so afraid of failure and so afraid of proving that I could do something with my eye disease that I lost the big picture, that there is a lot more to life than just work. Work is very important. It's very important to use our talents. It's very important to provide for our families. This is very important. But there is a lot more to life than just work. And so I started to realize in all of this kind of a collapse, if you will, or breakthrough. I remember being in counseling and I said, I feel like I'm having a breakdown. And she looked at me and said, no, you're having a breakthrough. I started to realize that there is no external success or external great experience or pleasure or money that heals the inside. Healing happens inside. And it is there for all of us to experience. In fact, there's even scientific studies now that people that make more than $75,000 a year are no happier than people that make $75,000. These are, academic university studies. So what does that mean? What that means is, as vision impaired people, we are just like everybody else. We have gifts, we have talents, we have struggles, and we have a whole life to build. And we can do that. We can do that. And so now the last 3 years, I've transitioned from a multi-decade Wall Street life and Wall Street profession to I'm doing ministry work in the Greek Orthodox Church. I work with men that are in transition. I work in the prisons, and I work with couples in couple ministry. It's been very rewarding. It's been very exciting to do this kind of work. There's a lot of work to be done in our society, and so I'm going to at least try to do my part of that work. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a sense of, an eye disease is just one part of us. It doesn't mean that we're flawed somehow, or that we're incapable, or inadequate. No, this is not true. And so I want to introduce one last framework that I use with people. And Chris, if you would put it up on the screen. There are many, many ancient writers that use the analogy of a temple or a house or a building as looking at a human person. Okay? It's a really cool analogy. And you'll see here, I have a Parthenon looking like building. That's because I'm 100% Greek. Everything comes from the Greek, right? No, just kidding. But it really does do a good job. And I use this when I work with individuals or couples. It's really powerful. So what you'll see here, for those of you who can't see, is it's a building that looks like the Parthenon. There's a foundation. And then there are these pillars of life. And these are the responsibilities or the activities, the things of our life that we do. So it might be our work, or it could be our health, or our friendships, or our family of origins, like our extended family, or it could be our marriages, or being a parent, a father or a mother. It could be our outreach work that we do, okay? Our finances. So it's all these activities. These are all the pillars that complete our home or our temple or our building, okay? And by the way, they take a lifelong to build. They take a lifelong to build. But like any building or any temple or any structure, the foundation sets the tone. So for example, if you build a home in California, you've got to have a foundation strong enough to provide protection on what? Earthquakes. Or if you build in Florida, those buildings have to be able to handle what? Hurricane. Many people don't know in Minnesota, the foundation has to go deep enough to protect against the frost line. It gets so cold here that if your foundation is not deep enough, it will crumble. Well, it's the same thing in life. What I'd like to ask you to think about is make your foundation something purposeful, because all your elements of life are going to be attached to that foundation. So for me, my foundation is actually my faith. It's my Christian faith. Christ is my foundation. So maybe your faith could be a foundation, whatever faith tradition you are. Or maybe it's the human virtues, kindness, compassion, courage, these things that are enduring. But you will make something your foundation. And so for me, for many, 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 many years, and Chris, if you go to the next slide, you'll see I tried to take the work pillar out, lay it down, and make work my foundation. So everything had to fit on top of my work. Everything. My marriage had to fit into it, my health, my time, my friendships. And of course, it didn't stand. It collapsed on me. The beauty is we can always rebuild. But the key is to really pick a foundation that you want to build on. In our society, it could be money people want to build on. It will not stand. When we're young, sometimes we think friendships is our whole foundation. Friendships are very important. They're a very important element of life. But friends go up and down and left and right too. So pick a foundation that you really want to build on. You can go to the last slide there, Chris. You can go back to the same slide. And you know, so what happens then in this, and I really want to make this really important, as visually impacted people, as retinal disease people or families, we're like anybody else. And we, one brick at a time, can build a beautiful home, a beautiful temple, a beautiful life. And in fact, you know, when we get further in our disease, you know, for those of you who are more progressed, you will start to see blessings. You know, like I remember visions of things when I was young. I can remember a sunset on an ocean. They're drilled into my mind. Or a mountain scene where I was around a mountain. Or a forest. I can remember what they look like. I can't see it at all anymore, but I remember them. And I hear nature. I hear birds, and I hear wind in the trees, and I hear the water on the shore in ways that I know other people don't hear. I hear my loved ones. You know, there's blessings. Because we can't see people as your eyes get worse, you know, you don't have that temptation of judging them for their looks. Do you know how big of a blessing that is? I can't judge people on their looks anymore. I still have other temptations, but I can't judge on looks. I just can't see people. It's a blessing. Because why? Because then you begin to hear people. And so you'll even hear your workmates at work, or your kids, or your wife, or your friends. You know, and in fact, sometimes we feel other people's pain. Why? Because we've had pain. And maybe we now become more sensitive to other people's pain. And we realize we need other people. Do you know what a gift that is? Because you know what? We can try to do life alone. It doesn't matter if we have an eye disease or not. If we try to do life alone, we're really missing opportunity. We need each other, and we need to help one another. So these are blessings that come. So in this way, one step at a time, one brick at a time, with labor, with love, with patience, we build a home. And it can become an inspiring home. And in fact, then our suffering is matched with joy. And our pain can be coupled with healing, internal healing. And our sadness, our sadness can bring hope. And that then brings a light. And I will tell you then, our homes, as we build, can become a home of light. And even if it's just a little light, it will inspire what is really a dark world. And we've then done our part by bringing a little light to this world. So I really want to encourage you to have a great Visions 2020 conference. I wish you were here in person, but we're going to do the next best thing this year. I hope that you learn lots, ponder lots, get excited to help the foundation so that we can go out there and have a generational success story of cures for retinal disease. And I hope to meet you in person sometime. Thank you.